Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction. And today I'm talking with Scott Horton, and I ask him about the ongoing trend in the American right toward non-interventionism, specifically with people like Tucker Carlson having Scott on a show, or Tucker opposing the war in Iran, or even Israel's war in Gaza and the US's participation in it. I also asked Scott about Russiagate and Tulsi Gabbard's announcement that maybe Obama was behind Russiagate the whole time. And then I asked Scott about whether he thinks the war in Ukraine is going to be ending anytime soon. But before we get into it, please remember to get your tickets to Ron Paul's 90th birthday barbecue that is on August 9th in Lake Jackson, Texas. I'm going to be there, and I hope to see you there. And then check out the Human Reaction podcast, a podcast that I'm in partnership with. My friends David Rand, Joe Sheehan, and Kyle Mack are putting out weekly podcasts on the news and culture, and they're putting out really great stuff. So I'll have the links to both the birthday barbecue and their podcast in the description below. And if you like this podcast, please share it around, like, subscribe, and comment, or even become a member on YouTube. Thank you so much, and here's Scott Horton.
Liam McCollum, really one of the brightest young minds in the liberty movement, one of our rising stars.
All right, Scott, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to say it's been quite a pleasure to see you on platforms like Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan's regularly at this point. As someone who's been somewhat of a student of yours, who, you know, I think you are the person I've interviewed the most on my podcast, and you were actually the first person who agreed to do my show. Someone who's been following you for years. It's been pretty cool to see.
Ah, cool. Well, thanks, man. Although, you know, I think Piers Morgan kind of quit calling me. It's been a few weeks since the Iran war thing, but we'll see. But yeah, the Tucker Carlson thing was a lot of fun, and a good new association to make there.
Well, so it reminded me at the end of the podcast, you said something to the effect of like, your job and your goal with the Libertarian Institute is to basically reach out to the right wing in America and convince them that we cannot have a limited republic and an empire abroad. And it reminded me that you actually introduced me to Justin Raimondo's Reclaiming the American Right. I think I want to say like 4 or 5 years ago. And I just wanted to get your take on the current moment and whether you think, despite all of the fracturing we're seeing on the right now with the MAGA coalition, whether you think we actually are in some ways reclaiming the American right.
Yeah. Look, I mean, our libertarianism has always been a populist type thing. I mean, antiwar.com and, of course, the Mises Institute and that whole side of the movement existed before I was ever a part of it or anything like that. But I was already the same way, too, where I did pirate radio in Austin. So my audience was always just intended to be regular people exposing what people with power are doing. Now, there are some libertarians who they move to Washington and their whole goal is to influence public policy in a way by getting the experts to listen to them, which is fine and admirable in its own way. But my message has always been in antiwar.com and sort of the Rothbardian way is always and the Ron Paulian way is, mass education, get everybody to agree with us and we win. Rather than, here we need like a secret strategy to win. Because if there's enough of us, then all those strategies will play out anyway. It's like there's always a fight. Should we all be in the LP or should we all be in the Republican Party or should we not participate in politics at all? Or, these kinds of questions. If there's enough of us, it doesn't matter because the answer is yes to all of those things. You know what I mean? We should even have people who lean a little bit left ought to be perfectly fine to send into the Democratic Party to go and do whatever they can to try to make them slightly less worse, if that's even possible. But overall, and this is, the Rothbard strategy of the 90s is to ally with the paleo conservatives, and then, which is an intellectual movement of few, you know what I mean? But like to work with those guys to lead the masses of the American right, who were obviously hugely disaffected by the Bill Clinton regime then and everything that it was doing. And of course, that Monica Lewinsky ended up being the ultimate sabotage of all of that because it changed the whole subject. And it was so easy. God, I'm so resentful over that still. Like, oh, it turns out we're not anti-government at all. We just don't like this president. And once we get a new president in there, everything will be worshipful and wonderful again. As you know, if only we could respect. You know what we'll do? We'll pretend that W. Bush is Ronald Reagan, and we'll just love him. And just so that was sad, and the whole project to influence the right then kind of was all for naught because hey, they attacked us and got to fight the Muslims and whatever. But after 25 years being lied to about that, and now everybody can see it's not even since Obama, since W. Bush changed his mind. America's been back on the side of Al Qaeda since 2006. So don't give me this war on terror crap. You know what I mean? That's clearly not right. And I think people can see that. They saw the fall of Iraq to the Islamic State because of Obama. Bush gave them Western Iraq. Obama gave them Eastern Syria. They turned it into the dang caliphate. So after all the pressure on all of us to go along, we have to do this. We don't just have to do it. We have to stay for years and years and years, no matter how bad it gets. In fact, the worse it is, the more we have to stay until we get it right and all of that. And then they didn't get a thing right. It was all for nothing. Empower their regional rivals and their deadly enemies and got nothing out of it whatsoever. So people, as they should be, are rightfully jaded about all of that. And by the way, I shouldn't sell them too far short because even after the impeachment of Clinton and when he launched the Kosovo war, the American right generally out in the country was against it. Newt Gingrich and Trent Lott in the Republican Party, of course, supported it. John McCain, of course, supported it. But in the talk radio audiences, and Rush Limbaugh supported it. But I think, and Liddy did too, because Liddy was a McCain guy. But the regular audiences out in talk radio land and most of the hosts, I think, the local ones, were against it. It's a Bill Clinton war. How could you line up and salute that guy? Are you kidding? So with just the absolute bankruptcy of American foreign policy in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe as well, with America just completely bankrupt, where we're paying more for interest on the debt than we're even paying for the world empire per year at this point, I think. And just go outside, drive around. There's people living outside more than ever before in any of our lifetimes. You know what I mean? It's like Biden's too old for this. America's too broke for this. It just doesn't make sense that we do this anymore. It's so obvious to everyone now. And so, a big lesson to me of Ron Paul and his whole career, and especially the Ron Paul revolution, is that ultimately it really does come down to social psychology and whether people feel like it's okay to change their mind. If I'm going to change my mind about this thing, does that mean I'm changing my whole identity to now I'm one of those people who I agree with because I don't like those people and I don't want to agree with them. And that's how people feel about it. I understand. I like to bring up, I need to use this in an intro clip somewhere or something where Hank Hill and Cotton Hill are shopping for Christmas decorations, and Hank holds up this thing that says peace on it, and Cotton goes, I can't remember what he says, but Cotton gets all mad. This is a King of the Hill reference for you people who have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. And Hank Hill, the stereotypical conservative Texas father, basically in the cartoon, says, "No, Dad, not hippie peace, Jesus peace." It's okay at Christmas time for a Republican to not be for killing people because this is the time of year where we sort of pretend to believe in that religion of ours again a little bit and whatever, and take that a little bit seriously before we go back to being Republicans again in January, or whatever it is. And think of just how bad patchouli hippie stinks to a right winger like Hank Hill or Cotton Hill. And don't get that stink on me. I don't want to be around any nasty, dirty, America-hating commies. And if they care about the Palestinians, then I don't. And if they say we shouldn't attack Iraq, then I say we should, because whatever's the opposite of them, that's me. But then Ron Paul goes, actually, well, I'm a Texas Republican congressman, and I think this whole thing is completely stupid and wrong. And we don't have to be doing any of this at all. And we just marched in. We can just come home. And they went, oh. Ron Paul said that? A Texas Republican said that? Well, what are his evil commie reasons? And then he starts talking about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and strangling alliances and free markets and peace and Jesus peace, not hippie peace. And they go, oh, you know what? Maybe it's all right. In other words, Ron Paul's telling them, you don't have to move left. I'm not asking you to move left because I ain't there. I'm here with you. I'm just telling you to stop being a numbskull about this one thing where you've decided to go along with a bunch of idiocy. And you ought to feel liberated and relieved to find out that actually you don't have to go along with this anymore. Why would you? I mean, when I first started reading antiwar.com, and honestly, I swear to God, this is true. And I really cared about this stuff. I was always like this since I was in elementary school. I was interested in this stuff. But it wasn't until 1999 that I learned that Pat Buchanan was anti-war. And then when I found that out, man, I went around beating people over the head with that so bad. This guy's a right-wing Republican nationalist Ronald Reagan speechwriter. And he is against this. And you're worse than him, I could say to any liberal Democrat who is going along with the thing. You know what I mean? You can't be worse than Pat on this. You know what I mean? And what does it mean to a Republican that, like, when you find out that Ronald Reagan's speechwriter, you know, Mr. Conservative on TV in that era, that he's anti-war? You know it's not because he's a hippie. Pat Buchanan is not a hippie. So what is it then? Oh, it's that he is extremely learned. Oh, this is a guy who's a brilliant genius and writes history books and knows a lot more about it than you. That's why he's against it, because he's smart. That's a whole different thing than being a hippie and a commie and Jane Fonda sitting on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft gun or whatever kind of prejudices that people have left over from the new left hippie era of the 60s. I just forget all that. I mean, I know you know very well, the anti-war movement in America now is led by BringOurTroopsHome.us and Defend the Guard. And these guys are anti-war veterans of this era, and they're all Republicans. And they're the ones using constitutional measures to try to bring an end to the empire by championing this Defend the Guard legislation. That's the modern anti-war movement now. It's a Ron Paulian, Pat Buchanan movement. So what's the damn problem? There's not one. Come on. And Tucker Carlson's leading the way. And not only is Tucker Carlson like the world's greatest expert on this because he was with the bad guys most of the time here and can verify all of what I'm telling you from the other side, right? But also, he's the moral voice of the right, right? Like, more than any, there's no Billy Graham, right? He's by far like there's no real like nationwide major Protestant Christian preacher that commands that much respect. And how does he talk about it? He says, this is an abomination. It's sickening. I hate it. I can't stand it. It's unfair. It's so ugly what they're doing, the cruelty, the pain and the grief that they're inflicting on people. It has to stop because it's wrong. And he's not a commie either. He's really our modern day Buchanan, right? He is our paleo conservative champion. But he's saying, look, dude, you're not supposed to be going around killing people. What are you doing? This is crazy. And of course, he's doing his penance, right? This is him making up for his role in helping the war party before. And he's going, no, we're not doing this again. Not only am I not going along with this, but I'm going to do everything I can to stop you. And so, boy, you need somebody to believe in. There's your anti-war movement. Tucker Carlson and Dan McKnight. And of course, the great Ron Paul. You know, this is what we're doing. And how could anybody believe in the empire anymore? Oh, to protect us from Iran. Give me a break, man. You know, and by the way, I just saw this. One more rant before I finally shut up. And I probably shouldn't have flown off the handle and wrote a comment, but hopefully they won't even see it. But I saw a short of some right-wing podcaster guy. And the thing begins with, oh, Joy Reid, she's so stupid. And I'm like, oh, good, I'm going to like this because I hate her, stupid lady. And then he says, she says, how come Iran can't have a nuclear program? And I'm like, oh, great. Thanks a lot, Joy Reid. This is the last thing I need. It's the dumbest lady in America to say anything reasonable about America's Iran policy. You know, she's getting stupid all over, smart. And so then his reaction was, oh, yeah, let me get this straight. We're just supposed to trust Iran with 60% uranium. Stupid red herring. Oh, why'd they bury it under a mountain then? Because the Israelis threatened to bomb it, dude. You know what I mean? It's like all these, he doesn't know anything about it. All he knows is Joy Reid said, and why in the world would they need to have a nuclear program when they have all that oil? Well, the answer is capitalist economics, dude. Burn the uranium, sell the oil. There are easy answers to this. Of course, the 60% uranium was for diplomacy to try to get America back in the deal. So the guy's got nothing. He's just repeating stupid right-wing talking points. But you know how he knows he's right? He's got to be right. Because Joy Reid said the opposite. And she is such a stupid, horrible idiot who was on the wrong side of every stupid, horrible, woke thing for the last decade. And how can anyone forget that? And now she wants to go if she identifies herself with skateboarding, it'll go out of style like rollerblading, right? Because nobody wants anything to do with Joy Reid. But then you see how stupid and wrong and unfair that is? What if she says she loves Jesus? You going to abandon your religion too? What if she drinks tap water? 8 glasses a day. Like now you've got to drink only Dr. Pepper like me. Or, you know what I mean? It's the wrong way to think about things, but it's very powerful. You can see how it has such an effect on people. Where this guy could have said, wait a minute, I'm going to learn all about Iran's nuclear program, and then I'm going to express an opinion about this. Instead, he's just going, no way. Trump says bomb them. Joy Reid says don't. I say bomb them. You know what I mean? Just makes sense for whose side you're on.
I think, though, the silver lining is, decentralized media, the fact that Tucker was able to leave Fox and then start his own podcast, invite you on, and then you're able to tell everyone about Defend the Guard, which I can't thank you enough for doing. But I really do think, when I was watching the Ukraine war unfold, I was really of the belief that when the Republicans got in power, they would ultimately pivot toward war with Iran or war with China. And even though the establishment it really does feel like the base, guided by Tucker Carlson, is waking up a little bit. It does feel like the base is moving in a more non-interventionist direction. And I actually wanted to play this clip for you. This is Michael Knowles after the news was dropped that Israel bombed the church, the only Catholic church in Gaza. And I think it really just is a signal as to where the right is right now, to where someone from Daily Wire can no longer tolerate the war and finally has to say enough.
As I've mentioned before, everyone seems to hate the state of Israel these days, mostly coming from the left, but some people on the right have joined. And I've been broadly supportive of the state of Israel, not really as an ideological matter, but as a matter of prudence. And you're losing me. You're losing me. When you strike churches, the only church in Gaza, even if accidentally, but especially if not accidentally, you're losing me. If you're losing Mike Huckabee, the Israeli government is really screwing up, is really not playing its cards right. If Trump, I think the press secretary yesterday said Trump was furious, Trump was angry, and not the exact word, but he was quite dismayed to hear about this attack on the church. I agree with the Holy Father. I agree with the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, and I agree especially with the Holy Father on most matters. The war needs to come to an end. There need to be political consequences for this action, and the war needs to come to an end. How long is the war going to go on? I know what the answer is. The answer is, well, until the hostages come home. Okay, well, how about we redouble our efforts to get the hostages home, if that's the impediment to peace? Because it seems like there have been a lot of side quests and side missions going in, the Iran nuclear facilities, maybe potentially regime change in Iran, occupying southern Syria. It seems like there have been a lot of distractions. The war has been going on for almost 2 years. When's it going to end? Just what's the end of it? Can anyone tell me that? When the hostages are released? Well, then focus on getting the hostages released. Well, no, when Hamas is totally destroyed. Okay, well, when's that going to be? When Iran is no longer funding terrorism? When's that going to be? When Syria is made safe for democracy? When? Give me an answer. Because the war cannot just go on indefinitely. A just war cannot just go on indefinitely. And when you start striking churches, accidentally or otherwise, when you start interfering with American interests, not allowing in the reporting about Ambassador Huckabee, when you start interfering with American groups going to the state of Israel, now we got a problem. And America is the only friend that Israel has on planet Earth. So I don't know. I do not get what the Israeli government is doing here, but I suspect there will be political consequences for it.
Yeah, so that's quite the signal as to where the American right is at. That, and I will say, I do think that this is very late. I mean, in October of 2023, we knew that Israel bombed an Orthodox church and Justin Amash's family was killed. So at the very least, he should have begun criticizing Israel then. But I still think that this is a signal that Israel has really pushed their luck on this.
America, at Israel's behest, destroyed Iraq and destroyed the Chaldean Christian communities of Iraq completely, scattered them to the wind. They're gone. In Syria, they had the Maronite and the, I forget the names of the other sects. There are two other major sects of Christians from Syria who were at least severely persecuted under Al-Qaeda rule during the last war, including in one city, it was like the last little town, a little town where they still spoke Aramaic. And they were essentially enslaved under Al-Qaeda control for years during, Obama's dirty war there. And are, under the control of Al-Qaeda now. They've mostly focused on murdering Alawites and Druze and others at this point. But they're obviously severely in danger, and they were severely disrupted. And many were killed in the dirty war 15 years ago through 10 years ago. So they can look forward to more of that. And I think, most Americans probably just imagine that in Palestine or in Israel, that the Christians are on the side of the Israelis and the Israelis are on the side of the Christians, because this is a majority Christian country and we're on Israel's side. Then they just kind of naturally figure that and don't know that actually the Christians there are the Palestinians among the Muslims and are mistreated horribly and occupied and brutalized and killed just the same as the Muslims next to them in the occupied territories. And so when people find that out, it's a pretty tough lesson. And there was a story last year where the Palestinian Christians on the West Bank were complaining because of Jews spitting in their faces when they would walk by. And their defense was, this is our tradition. That's what we're supposed to do whenever we see a Christian spit in their faces. That's not the Palestinian Muslims doing that. That's the Israeli Jews doing that. When people find that out, they go, what in the hell is going on here? And by the way, the Bible doesn't say anything about God only loves Jewish and or Christian children. And the level of barbarianism and cruelty that the Israelis have inflicted on the Muslim Palestinians this whole time, along with their Christian brethren, is comparable to Soviet communism or National Socialism in Germany. Just absolute torturing people to death, raping people to death, burying people alive by the thousands, deliberately shooting pregnant women in the stomach, blowing little toddlers' heads off, starving people to death and then luring them in with promises of aid and then machine gunning them, blasting them with artillery shells. This is the kind of thing that you would expect to hear about the way that they fight war in Bhutan or some godforsaken Oriental culture where Western traditions were never even heard of before, where tribes just wage total war against each other, their men, their women, their children, their elderly, their helpless non-combatants along with the rest of them. And they talk like it too. All you have to do is just pay enough attention and see. So Michael Knowles is right. It's even worse than he knows. They're killing Muslims too. They're killing everybody over there. And another thing I think people, they just assume otherwise because it just doesn't make sense the way it is now. So they assume that Palestine is the country next door. You'll hear people oftentimes confused. What is this talk about a two-state solution? What's the second state they're talking about? They're talking about maybe one day eventually letting the Palestinians have a state on the measly stinking 22% or less of what's left of Palestine, which is the occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. There is no Palestine. Israel's sitting on top of it. But see, if you even call somebody a Palestinian, It's just imply that they have a country. Of course, everybody has a country. You just call them a Palestinian. Sounds like he's from Palestine. But that doesn't mean there's a nation state called that they have independence or freedom in any way. In fact, Gaza is essentially an Indian reservation or a ghetto, just like the Warsaw Ghetto, where the Jews were rounded up and imprisoned by the Nazis in Warsaw, Poland. Or, even if you take like the very worst ghettos in the United States where poor blacks live, imagine if they just walled it off and started bombing them, right? We got way too much trouble from the blacks in South Chicago. You seen the crime rates around there? And then they just build a giant concrete wall around it, surrounded with razor wire, accuse them of some crimes, which maybe some of them are guilty of, and then carpet bomb the place, kill 50,000 of them, snipe their pregnant women and toddlers, conscript their grandmothers and force them to clear buildings for booby traps. It's barbarianism. It's the worst, most criminal regime on the face of the earth with no even close runner-up. They got to just make up lies about China and say that they are behaving just like this in the Xinjiang province, which is purely fantasy. This government is far worse than the Chi-Coms. No debate. The only runner-up is the United States of America, which supports them and runs all their errands for them, like putting the Iranians' friends in power in Baghdad for some stupid reason and putting Al-Qaeda in power in Damascus, all of which is at the expense of America's interests and the interests of the American people. So I don't know how it's lasted this long, but I am optimistic. I like to say the American conservative right, they believed in the Iraq war too, until they didn't anymore. And then all of a sudden it was like, geez, guess Ron Paul was right about that stupid thing. Maybe we shouldn't have done that after all. I can't believe it led to the rise of the caliphate we thought we were fighting to prevent. Only Uday and Qusay were here. God dang. And keep that spirit up, man. None of this is in America's interest at all. None of it. And I can't think of what positive attribute about Israel could Michael Knowles even have in mind? What good do they serve America at all? He says, you want America to be your best friend. Is there no obligation whatsoever for Israel to be a friend to the United States? They cause us nothing but grief and do absolutely nothing for us.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, this really is why Tucker Carlson is so important right now, because, he really is leading the evangelical right and saying, this is not Christian. And I think really the most profound interview or the most moving interview for me that he ever did was, other than yours, of course, was when he had Ron Paul on, and Ron Paul was like, bombing people isn't Christian. And that really felt like the moment where Tucker was like, okay, I'm going to pick up this mantle and I'm going to be anti-war. This is just the way I'm moving my podcast. And now you have the evangelicals represented by Tucker. You have the Orthodox, which have always been of this direction on foreign policy. You have Lutherans like myself that recognize what they're doing as absolutely terrible. And now you have Michael Knowles. So you have the Catholics, the Lutherans.
Are Presbyterians generally Democrats?
I don't think so. I think they're generally Republican, but I could be wrong.
The Presbyterian Church has been real good on this issue for many years.
Yeah.
Although I don't know exactly the shape of their different organizations, but I know that at least some Presbyterian organizations have been very good on this. Yeah,
I'm not certain about the demographics, but all the Presbyterians I know are Republican. But that just could be since I'm from Montana. But like you said, this really isn't nothing in the Bible says that Jews and Christians are different. In fact, it says there's no difference between Jews and Gentiles. It literally says no Jews, no Gentiles. There's no difference. So you're absolutely right. And I think, one of the worst part about this was in my comments when I posted that Michael Knowles video, a lot of people were saying, well, where have you been with all the Muslims killing Christians in Syria and all that? And then I posted this after in reaction to them. Well, Netanyahu claimed credit for starting the historic process that led to the fall of the Assad regime. So we're having Al-Qaeda currently in the streets murdering Christians, and Netanyahu is bragging about it.
Yep, that's true. By the way, you mentioned Justin Raimondo's book. For people who are interested, I brought this for Tucker too. I hope he reads. I think he was going to read it. He was digging through. There you go. He was digging through the table of contents. Very interested. This book, it's by Justin Raimondo. He was the editorial director of antiwar.com. And the book is called Reclaiming the American Right, The Lost Legacy of the American Conservative Movement. And it's great profiles of all of our great libertarian heroes and the best leaders of the old right who were anti-war and anti-central banking and anti-FDR and all that. And then the rise of the evil neoconservatives and how they hijacked the conservative movement and turned it into, an adjunct of the war machine. And he was just great. You'll love it. Everybody will just love reading Justin. He's fantastic on this stuff. And then this one, I also gave a copy of this to Tucker as well. Oh, got my hand over the author's name. The People's Pottage by Garrett Garrett. And this was Justin Raimondo's favorite writer and hero of the old right. And this book is divided in 3 sections. The Revolution Was, Ex-America, and Rise of Empire. And it was written in the early 50s. And so I think Rise of Empire, I think The Revolution Was is from earlier. Yes, I could check. It may say that the years there, but it's the first section is all about how Franklin Roosevelt ruined everything. The Revolution it's about the 30s and how they, overthrew the Constitution and enthroned the new imperial government. And then Ex-America is like, I forget exactly where we stand now as he's writing a more present tense thing. And then Rise of Empire is about the future and the destruction of America. And this is where I have him provoke the great quote, where he says, between a Republican form of government that is limited, constitutional, representative, and empire, there is mortal enmity. One system must forbid the other, or it will be destroyed by it. And the whole thing is like that, smart guy talk. I really like it. Really great writing. And Justin too. I mean, I've written these books, but I'm just a names and dates guy. These guys are the type that are born with a typewriter in their hand and just have so much to say. You know what I mean? And they're just exemplars of Justin's his own exemplar of the old right, like his mentor Murray Rothbard. So that's what the right should be about. I like to cite Gene Kirkpatrick, who was a legitimate neoconservative, despite what Mark Dubowitz, the lawyer, says. Even though it doesn't matter because Lex Friedman censored that part of our debate, so you won't even know what I'm talking about. Cut an hour out of that thing where I walked all over the guy.
An hour?
Yes, an hour was deleted out of that interview.
Unbelievable.
He left in the guy going, "Oh, when the Jews," which I never said twice, but entirely deleted my response from that and the hour-long discussion.
I saw that there was a cut.
I
saw that there was a cut, but I figured it was just like a minute or two.
Oh, yeah. No, it was an hour. We were there for 5 hours. They ran for.
Wow.
Anyway, he tried to say Gene Kirkpatrick wasn't a neoconservative, even though she was a Trotskyite from the Social Democrats USA and the Young People's Socialist League, who then moved to the right with Norman Podhoretz and all of her friends and wrote for Commentary magazine and became a right-wing hawk. And so the only thing not neocon about her is that she was a Presbyterian instead of Jewish or Catholic. But that's not the definition of a neocon anyway. It was a largely Jewish movement because who else was Trotskyites in America? Other than a few neighborhoods in Brooklyn or wherever where people believed in that kind of crap. Like nobody else in America was ever communist, not really, especially like some obscure, like weird side sect of commie. You know what I mean? It's not like we're even talking about the Communist Party USA or whatever. These are the Shockmanites. Whoever heard of that? You know what I mean? Anyway, so she was a neocon and moved to the right. And Dubowitz's argument was that she didn't put democracy above and before all other principles, spreading it throughout the world or whatever. But lots of neoconservatives disagree about a lot of things. So that was a completely inane and stupid argument. No wonder they deleted that out because I was winning so terribly. But anyway, I shouldn't say they. It was Lex Friedman who deleted it. But anyway, after the Cold War was over, but before the Soviet Union was even gone, in the late summer, she wrote in the late summer, it was published in the fall of 1990 in the National Interest. Jeane Kirkpatrick wrote an article called A Normal Country in a Normal Time. And you can read it, by the way. It's probably the only place you can find it in the world is at scotthorton.org/fair use. I have a copy of it there for you. And what she says is, look, now that the Cold War's over, we should give up our empire and come home right now. Everybody in Europe is cool. There's no mass totalitarian movement in Europe we need to quell or anything like that. And Britain and France and Germany can handle it and they can get on. And nobody's afraid of China. They're weak. Japan and Korea are strong and getting along. We can just come home and put our own country first. Worry about developing our own technology, our own prosperity, our own freedom, and be, as she put it, a usually successful commercial republic, something like that. Anyway, so yeah. But then what happened was the neocons won. And in fact, Charles Krauthammer wrote an article that was a direct rejoinder to her, and where he also took down Pat Buchanan and Russell Kirk, who were urging restraint and urging, that America come home now that the emergency was over, and said, no, now is our chance to seize control. We should stop short of nothing less than universal domination. And that was what Krauthammer said. That was what the neocons essentially accomplished, was taking over American policy. The people who wanted to come home, they just wanted to not do things, right? The neocons have things they want to do. And so it's an easier sell for the state. Hey, military, don't you guys want something to bomb? Don't you want to purchase some planes and get yourself a kickback? Don't you want to build a new golf course in Japan or whatever it is that you guys are doing? Don't you need an excuse to stay in Central Asia somehow? And then the answer is yes, yes, yes. We don't want to get jobs. So, the neocons worked with the military industrial complex to build up all the think tank structure to come up with the terror wars and to come up with NATO expansion and figure out a way to pick a fight with China and whatever else they can do. And that's been the program. But the reason I bring up Jeane Kirkpatrick is because she was to the nationalist right of reasonable. She was a real hawk. But when the emergent, just like I cite Pat Buchanan would fight to the last commie. But the commies are gone. And Pat Buchanan was man enough to say, okay, mission accomplished. We did it. Come home. The commies are gone. Now we can come home. You promised, because they did, right? They said this is just an emergency. If it wasn't for global communism, we wouldn't need to be an empire, but there is global communism. So we do need to be a world empire. Okay, well, now that there's not global communism, now we don't have to be a world empire, right? And the empire was like, shit, come on. What are we going to do? Go home and get a job, working in the sun like you? No.
Yeah, well, and you're right about Buchanan. I mean, I just watched the Culture War speech where he's talking about Reagan and he's boasting about how Reagan defeated the communists. And he's definitely not, he doesn't sound like a peacenik at that point.
No. And the thing is, I really regret that in 92, when he ran, that he did not really make anti-war a huge part of his platform. Because I didn't know that he was anti-war. I was a kid. I was like, ninth grade, 92. Yeah, I was in ninth grade. We just, after Iraq War I, was in ninth grade, 10th grade. And I didn't know Pat Buchanan was anti-war. I knew that he was like a trade protectionist and that was a disagreement between him and the mainstream establishment at that time. And I knew the Culture War speech which means like boil down, the problem is just, liberal cultural norms and civil rights and abortions and this kind of thing, which those weren't my issues. And the thing is, like I was saying about Ron is, yeah, like all Christian Republicans are anti-abortion, whatever. That's fine. That's what they all agree on and whatever. But when you find out that a guy like Ron Paul or a guy like Pat Buchanan is anti-war, that's supposed to be puzzling and curious and interesting, and you should want to know why. Because it's not because they're a commie. So what is it then? And so at that time, I couldn't have told you the difference between Pat Buchanan and Pat Robertson. In fact, I did used to confuse those guys back then, where Pat's Catholic and is not a preacher and is a totally different character. But what the hell? I don't know. They're both Republicans named Pat to me. And as far as I can tell, they both agree on everything, where that was not true. And Pat stood starkly in opposition to American imperial foreign policy. But the thing is, he didn't get the joke that you got to hit on that, because that's the thing that's going to be ironic to people. That's going to be the thing that makes them listen, is when you denounce. And see, the thing is, for people who were very plugged in, they knew that he opposed Iraq War I. Again, I was just like in ninth grade. I was interested, but I was as informed as a ninth grader who watches CNN all day can be. You know what I mean? Like what? I don't know. So for people who really like read the magazines or whatever, they would have known. But for just a regular TV consumer of news and party politics on TV, these differences were not made clear. And so I always thought, he should have, and in 96 too, he should have run as an anti-imperialist and called on all good liberal Democrats to stay home or switch parties, vote Republican and vote for him in the primaries. And if you're really anti-war, and I know you people are sincere, then let's support a real anti-war guy. I swear I'm going to get it done. I'm serious as I could possibly be. We are bringing the troops home from Germany, from Italy, from Britain, from Korea, from Japan. And our Navy is going to sail around our continent and keep us free. And that's going to be the end of that. And then if he'd been loud and clear about that, and because he's such a nice guy and such a sincere guy, he always has such a wonderful smile. Pat Buchanan's a wonderful man. And so like, even as right-wing as he was on cultural issues, if he had been really stark about that, it would have been like a great cultural disruptor, right? It would have really called into question the Bill Clinton coalition and left-wing and progressive support for what Bill Clinton was doing at that time.
You could have had like the Ron Paul moment like 10 years before. Yeah. And in the same way that, we kind of say that Ron Paul kind of set the stage for Donald Trump and the right wing to kind of question imperialism. I mean, it would have been interesting to see if Buchanan had done that 10 years before, if they would have been primed for Ron Paul at that point.
Yeah. And by the way, for conservatives who maybe just don't know what to think of what we're saying about Israel-Palestine, look up Pat Buchanan on YouTube talking about Israel-Palestine, and you'll see where he describes this. And there's even an episode, you should be able to find it probably, man. Last time I saw it was a few years ago, where I think he's even guest hosting, or maybe he's just being interviewed alongside the Queen of Jordan. And they're talking about the negotiations, they're talking about the maps, they're talking about the deals, and they're talking about the Israeli intransigence in it all. And again, Pat Buchanan was not Pat Robertson. Pat Buchanan was a brilliant genius. He's retired now, but he's still with us. Check his archives. Read Pat Buchanan's articles at antiwar.com. Antiwar.com/Pat. Can't get simpler than that. And just go back and read through those archives, man. This guy, he clearly had the tightest grasp of all these issues. I used to be on a very short email list with him, Seymour Hersh, Gordon Prather, the nuclear weapons physicist, and Jude Wanniski, the monetary economist, and one or two others. And I mostly stayed out of it. I mix it up with them a little bit, but like, this a guy, they would argue about Iran, and he'd be like, look, let me tell you about the Bushehr reactor, okay? And he just you know what I mean? Like Ron Paul
that's awesome.
Also knows all the details about what it is he's talking about, because he's an antiwar.com guy. And we've run his articles since before I was around at antiwar.com, and keep his archive there very proudly. He's long been a supporter of ours. And Justin Raimondo gave this speech nominating him at the Reform Party convention in 2000. And,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It's a great speech. I said they cut him off. They give him the hook around the neck and drag him out of there before he's done. But it's a great America First speech, man.
Yeah, well, I recently just started reading his books, and I am blown away by his knowledge. And of course, the attack the reason that the right has disregarded him is because they call him a revisionist, just like, they're doing with Daryl Cooper today. So, I mean, that's the reason that most right wingers treat him as radioactive, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, the thing is, they didn't really controversialize his book, Churchill, that much because they didn't really want to talk about it because it's just too good.
Yeah.
And he's too good of a writer. And he cites only English historians as his sources. So
yeah, like Niall Ferguson.
Yeah. Niall. I hate that guy so much.
Was that your Timcast debate with Ferguson?
No, I did a zero hedge debate with him.
Yeah, that's right.
And I blew it. It's my fault. I mean, the problem is I hate that guy. And I'm a child, right? I'm not grown up all the way. So I just absolutely despise the guy. I'd love to see horrible things happen to him. I've always hated him since World War II, and I'll never forgive him for that. So, and I was already in a bad mood because I've been arguing with Zionists on Twitter all morning. And then I got on there, and the first thing he does is go, oh, he's got that snobby British accent. He talks as slow as he can to just drag out the time. The moderator's on his side. So I get to make one point in my argument, and the moderator immediately steps in and interrupts me and makes me stop. I didn't even really get to finish explaining the first part about the NATO promises. And then he's, oh, well, these are Russian talking points and you're just repeating the thing. And I was like, dude, I want to beat the shit out of that guy. I just despise him. And so I started talking about how much I hate him and ridiculing him and whatever, but that just looked bad. I just look childish, and then he gets to look like Mr. Snooty Professor and whatever. But the truth is I debated his wife too, and I ridiculed her and bodied her in front of an entire massive crowd of people at Freedom Fest. And everybody laughed at her and thought it was hilarious. And Mark Skousen came up after and goes, man, you made her argument better than her. And then you destroyed it. That was incredible. So I got to mock Ferguson to his face that I had humiliated his disgusting whore wife too. So that was okay. He left his wife and children to marry, Hirsa Ali. She's like the mascot of the war party because she's the ex-Muslim Somali woman who says that the West should kill all Muslims because they're all such barbarians and whatever. So she's their little pet mascot of the war party. And that's who he left his wife and children for, is a disgusting whore bag who was a tiny child up there in terms of debate. She had no idea what she was talking about. She was repeating half talking points she thought she'd heard somewhere and nothing. It was ridiculous.
Well, I didn't remember your Niall Ferguson debate going that way. I thought you destroyed him, but I guess my point in bringing him up,
I overdid it. I admit I overdid it. I should have taken a few bone rips before the thing and kind of chilled out a little bit, but I couldn't bury it. I just hate that guy so much. So I'm like, man, whatever. Right.
But I guess my point was just like, if Buchanan is citing him throughout his whole book, the Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, then they really probably don't want to address it because they're just stealing his points anyway, his research.
That's funny. I'd forgotten that he cited Ferguson. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. All throughout it. I'm reading it right now. Yeah.
That's funny. I had forgotten that. I'll forgive you, Pat. Or maybe he was just making a point, rubbing it in.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, he's basically taking all of Niall's points about for instance, like Danzig, that they shouldn't have given the war guarantee to Poland and the consequences of that. But Niall basically says even though the Britons couldn't have defended Poland, it was still worth doing it because Hitler was such a unique evil. So he'll take Niall's research and agree with it, but then basically he takes a different conclusion. That's funny. Yeah. And then, but I mean, a lot of the historians that he's citing, he's not doing that to them. He's just saying, as they concluded, right. Boy, was this stupid. That book is really something else. As I told Tucker, I said, they say that George W. Bush is the Winston Churchill of the 21st century. And I think that's probably right. After reading Pat's book, I'm thinking Winston Churchill was the George W. Bush of the 20th century. Yeah. The problem is, you learn about World War II when you're in 5th grade, and it's all this black and white pictures of all this stuff that happened way before you were born. And so it all just seems so inevitable. And especially when it's the clash of the good powers versus the evil ones in a way that, obviously World War I is much more muddy, but fighting Hitler and Tojo, who could argue with that? You know what I mean? And so it's just so much of it gets baked in of the inevitability of the thing and how it all just had to be that way.
And of course, you look at the monstrous evil of the German regime. You're talking about not just what they did in the 30s, right? But you're talking about their behavior in the war. As you know, Pat said to me, I interviewed Pat about the book, and he said to me, he goes, "Look, man, no war, no Holocaust. They just called off the war then. It wouldn't happen at all." And I'm not entirely sure about that, because I think that Russia and Germany would have ended up fighting anyway. Once they divided Poland, now they're sharing a border. You got matter and antimatter right there, man. That's going to turn into something at some point. But then, without the war guarantee, there was no reason for Germany to fight France and Denmark and Belgium first, right? And destroy the Western democracies before turning east against the commies. And in fact, that's the whole reason that he signed the peace with the Soviet Union, was after the Brits gave the war guarantee. He said, well, I guess I'll have no choice. I'll have to fight the Western powers first before I fight the Eastern ones, because I won't be able to fight Russia with my Western flank exposed. So they just, if we're talking about guys playing chess in the park, the British blew it, man, right? Like, they played a really lousy game, right? With whatever hand that they were dealt in the situation. And, and of course, the only lesson we're supposed to ever draw from World War II is that America should have launched a preemptive war against Germany in like 1935 or something, I guess, right? That we were so selfish and greedy that we waited until we were attacked at Pearl Harbor and waited until Germany declared war on us, when maybe we should have attacked in 39 when he took the Sudetenland or whatever. I don't know. They never quite say that, but that's sort of the point.
Yeah.
Neville Chamberlain should have declared war instead of coming home with the Munich Pact, right? But that's the only flaw that you could say. We should have jumped in sooner and earlier, when really it's the war itself that resulted in the ultimate evil of the Nazi atrocities on the Eastern Front,
Right. And also the lesson of like what war guarantees incentivize the country you're guaranteeing to do. Yeah. And the fact that Danzig they were actually Poland was in negotiations with Germany over Danzig, which was majority German, but the British Chamberlain reaches out and says, you have a war guarantee, and now Danzig doesn't want to negotiate.
Yep. And at that time, if I remember it right, Lord Grey, who was the foreign secretary, well, first of all, Chamberlain did this in a fit of embarrassment and rage when he found out that he'd been embarrassed with that Hitler had broken the Munich Pact. And so, like, in that moment, he sent off a wire, that hour or whatever, while he was still upset. And Lord Grey said, "Oh my God, you did what? I can't believe you did that." And then later said to someone else that the prime minister should be locked in an insane asylum. And that was the foreign minister the prime minister didn't check with before he gave that order, wrote that letter. So it's been a few years since I read it, but that was the way. I'm pretty sure it was Lord Grey that had said that. So, but yeah, look, anyway, the point is that Pat Buchanan is great. That's the real point, and that everybody should read his books. And he wrote a whole bunch of them, like Where the Right Went Wrong, Suicide of a Superpower, The Death of the West, Day of Reckoning, State of Emergency, Right from the Beginning, The Great Betrayal, and A Republic, Not an Empire, along with Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, along with all of his great articles at antiwar.com/Pat.
Yeah, I just ordered a Republic, Not an Empire, so I'm looking forward to that one. But
you hate Woodrow Wilson, right?
Oh, of
maybe
course.
You don't hate him good enough.
Yeah, well, and also
we'll have to work on that.
Well, and also, I think I wanted to bring up Daryl Cooper's, because you just started this awesome podcast with Daryl Cooper, and it was a #1 news show in the country. Hey. I saw that, and congrats, by the way. That's awesome.
Thank you.
But the comment about Churchill, it just baffled me how controversial that was, because it was always, and maybe it was just because I kind of grew up in this world and was always interested in revisionist history, but like, I always thought the focus was on World War I, and everyone kind of conceded that the mistake was World War I, and that without World War I, we wouldn't have had World War II. And as Pat Buchanan says, like, he considers World War I and World War II the Great War, the Great European War, and it's just one large war. And from that, I always took that like, okay, well, then who was responsible for getting us into World War I? And if you look at
Churchill too, yeah.
If you look at Churchill when he was first Lord of the Admiralty in World War I, I mean, he did everything possible to lure the United States into war. I mean, he actually
setting up the Lusitania.
Exactly. And I mean, he had a quote where it was like, the greatest maneuver in war is that which brings your ally into war, not just a victory in battle. He was basically saying that the maneuver that brings an ally into war is better than a victory in battle in the war. So, I mean, over and over again, he's trying to bring the United States into war, and he kind of has this record of wanting to start war. And Churchill describes him as, Buchanan describes Churchill as being kind of bloodthirsty. And he was, I forget what the quote was, but he's like, I do not want this war to end, basically, is what he said in World War I. So it always amazed me that Daryl Cooper's comment was as controversial as it was.
Well, what happened was he said two things in a row, and he was slightly unclear about it and set himself up a little bit because he goes on tangents a lot, kind of. And sometimes the thought doesn't get all the way wrapped up. So the first thing was he said that Churchill was the chief villain of the war. And even though he said, I like messing with my Anglo friend and poking him a little bit about that and whatever. And so he's being provocative anyway. And he said that he was kind of half joshing around, but then, so he said that part. And then he also said that he described a situation where when they had invaded Poland, they had all these prisoners and they didn't know what to do with them and they weren't going to be able to feed them. And he quotes this, German prison guard writing back to Gestapo headquarters and saying, we don't have food for all these people. Maybe it'd be better to just shoot them all. And then they went off there on a tangent. I think from there, they talked about how Israel has an obligation to feed the people of Gaza as they're exterminating them because they're a captive population and they're responsible for feeding them. When you take possession of people, millions of them, then you're responsible for their well-being. And so the statements were a little disjointed, and there was two of them in a row. And so combined with the Churchill thing, people misunderstood. Now, some of them were just being Niall Fergusons, but others were, I think it's fair to say some people honestly misunderstood him, that he was saying that was what the Holocaust was just the Germans didn't know how to feed the people that they had captured, when that was not his point, and that's not what he said. In fact, there's a new interview of Tucker Carlson with a German broadcaster, and the German goes, yeah, and Daryl Cooper said that's all the Holocaust was an accident that happened when they didn't have enough food. And Tucker goes, that is not what he said. And the guy goes, yeah, huh? And Tucker goes, no, nuh-uh, dude. But that's what the guy thought he heard, and that's what a lot of people thought they heard, and especially after he already had trashed Churchill, they were sure that was what he meant and whatever. So that just whatever was basically, it was also it was election time. And so they thought, here's something that we can use against Tucker and against Trump. That, oh, look, see, they're pro-Hitlerites over there at Tucker's show or whatever, kind of thing. So it was part of that. Like, oh my God, did you hear that a guy said a bad thing about the Puerto Ricans? And just whatever they could do to try to gin up outrage against Trump at that time, right? So that was a big part of it as well. But, Daryl, first of all, is a good historian and a decent guy. So no, that wasn't his point. But you want to talk about the evils of Churchill and the thing? Yeah, he could talk to you about that because, like you're saying, he's a good historian. He knows a lot about it. And there's a lot of negative things to say about Churchill, and he was his own biography, man. He wrote the 6-volume history of World War II that everybody relies on, his take, and like derivatives of it. But there are a lot of other points of view than one of the chief perpetrators to take into account there, I think.
Well, even Churchill concedes that it was the Treaty of Versailles that brought about Hitler in those memoirs afterward.
Right. Well, see, that's what they always say here is that, I don't know about in England, but the mythology that I was brought up on in government school was that it wasn't that Woodrow Wilson got us into the war and that tipped the balance and ended the stalemate and made it a British and French victory and all that. It wasn't that. It was that the Senate refused to ratify the League of Nations Treaty. And if the Senate hadn't been so right-wing and reactionary and obstinate and had signed Woodrow Wilson's Great Treaty, then America would have been a part of the League of Nations and we would have prevented Germany from rising again. And that would have been what stopped World War II, would have been American dominance on the continent 20 years previous. And so it was all Henry Cabot Lodge's fault, not Woodrow Wilson's.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering really quick if we could cover one more issue.
Yeah, sure.
You covered Russiagate a lot in your book Provoked. You had a whole section on it. And, a lot of talk has been had about like whether Russiagate is or whether this new thing that Tulsi announced that Obama was behind, this treasonous plot to frame President Trump as a traitor of this country, whether this news is just a response to the whole Epstein thing and the fact that he's fracturing his base. This is kind of like throwing the base a bone. And I'm wondering if you think this is legit or not.
No, that's not it, dude. Listen, they've been investigating this for months. They've been digging through these files and building up this case for months. Gabbard sent a criminal referral to the DOJ. That's not just a distraction from Epstein. That's its own separate operation that's been going on here. And it's clearly part of the deal. Like, I'm only using my imagination, but come on. This is part of the deal between Tulsi Gabbard and Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You put me in charge of those files, we're going to get them sons of bitches, Mr. President. Okay, you got the job, lady. Right? Like, that's what happened there. Because remember, they put her in there too. She's a section in my Russiagate chapter there, where they smeared her. And so she's like, oh, yeah? Well, now I'm the DNI. So we're not going to smear you. We're going to indict you, dude. And so, like, I wish them the very best and ultimate vengeance. I hope John Brennan goes to prison for the rest of his lousy life. Him and Jim Comey and all the rest of those guys. As far as Barack Obama, he may very well have deniability here. His men are the ones who did the things that he ordered them to do. And you'd have to know what he thought at the time. I can show you, I can demonstrate to you, no problem, that the FBI knew that Christopher Steele had brought them. He told them from the first day he showed up, that this is opposition research paid for by Hillary Clinton. He didn't lie to them about that. And they dismissed it right away. The FBI, John Solomon has had the story on this years ago. They set up a spreadsheet and they went through all the claims in the Steele dossier and they proved in one day that it was completely fake. They knew that Carter Page was a hero and a loyal CIA asset and not a traitor long before this. They knew they had nothing on Papadopoulos. They didn't even try to bring him to the FISA court because whatever lie he'd been fed and that they tried to get out of him on the other side amounted to nothing. And so they had nothing on him. They could build a New York Times story out of it, but they couldn't build an FBI case or a CIA case based on that intelligence whatsoever. And then all the stuff about Mike Flynn and the phone call, that came after the big meeting on December 9th with Barack Obama, where Mike Flynn was on the phone with the Russian ambassador, and they lied about that. They either one, forged the transcript and put absolute false words that he never said in his mouth, or they just convinced Vice President Pence to lie about what the transcript said when they showed it to him. Because it didn't, when they finally released the real transcript, it did not say what they had accused him of saying, making any deal over sanctions at all. All he said was the Russians, he advised them to not return Obama's favor and kick American diplomats out of Russia and escalated tit for tat, because after all, the regime is changing here in Washington soon. And that was fine. The Russians instead invited them to a Christmas party instead of kicking them out. That wasn't promising to lift sanctions in any form whatsoever. He asked Kislyak, would you please veto a UN resolution ordering the Israelis to end their occupation of the West Bank? And he said no. And so that was the end of that. Who's working for who there? Mike Flynn asked the Russian a favor, and he said no. So there's nothing there. Jeff Sessions was just a senator, met with the Russian ambassador in his office in front of his army colonels that were on his staff. And give me a break, dude. They knew they were lying before. And the big meeting that Tulsi Gabbard's revealing is in December. So the FBI and also, pardon me, the FBI and the CIA had dismissed Steele, but they also had dismissed the Alpha Bank hoax, the Yada Phones hoax, the DNS server hoax. And we now know that the FBI, and I'm not sure why Comey's mem is just the compartmentalization of the thing, but the FBI and the NSA gave only low confidence to the central claim of the whole damn thing, dude, which was that the Russians had hacked the DNC and DCCC and given those emails to WikiLeaks. And John Bolton said he thought it was a false flag, that the Democrats had done it to themselves. I don't know that that's true. I don't know who did the leak. There's no reason to believe it was the Russians at all. And it was a Democrat hired computer security firm called CrowdStrike that's run by a Ukrainian American Putin hater named Alperovich, and who have no credibility whatsoever, who came up with that attribution. So by the time they met with Obama on December the 9th, the FBI and the CIA had a dozen reasons to know for a fact that this is a bunch of crap. Problem is, John Brennan's the one who cooked it up in the first place. John Brennan was the one who had sent out all these people to quote unquote bump into Trump campaign officials and employees and associates and try to get them to do something. And that was in the end of 2015. He had sent this message to the Five Eyes, the Anglophone countries, see what you can do. That was obviously, we don't know 100% certain, but very likely seems to be the origin of the whole Papadopoulos thing, where they sent a British MI6 agent to feed him a rumor, and then they sent a Australian ambassador to try to get the rumor out of him as a predicate for the thing, but it didn't really work. They brought it up, but then they dropped it because they didn't even feel like they could take that to the FISA court. So, and then we know that John Brennan, and we know from the documents now that they were going to give Obama a presidential daily brief on December the 8th, and that then they pulled it due to the new guidance. And now that brief, this is where the Democrats are saying that this is all a red herring. That was saying that we have no evidence that the Russians hacked all the election infrastructure and changed the vote totals. Well, that's slightly a red herring because that was never the government's real accusation. Now, Hillary Clinton would say that, they hacked the election. She didn't say exactly that they changed the vote totals. She'd heavily imply that they hacked the election. They stole the election. They gave it to him. Just like when George W. Bush says something that doesn't quite make sense, you sort of kind of reconstruct it in your own head. Sounded like he just said Saddam did 9/11, right? You know what I mean? And so here, it sounds like she said they hacked the vote totals when she said they hacked the election. Oh, no, that's just a figure of speech for they hacked her DNC server and gave these emails to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published them, and that made you unfairly dislike her. And, okay, so you got to follow the syllogism all the way back to the original lie in the first place, and then you have a pile of lies that you can go with. That was all that was. So now, what did Obama know? I don't know, but the next day after they pulled the PDB that they never gave him, they had this big meeting, and notably the head of the FBI, Comey, and the head of NSA weren't there, Mike Rogers. I'm not exactly sure what was the reason for that. If that was because Hillary was blaming Comey for her loss already by December, I guess could have been part of that. Or I don't know what was going on with that. But then, and they were low confidence on the technical stuff. And, if anybody, Liam, if anyone knew for a fact and could prove for a fact who hacked the DNC, it would have been the NSA. They can rewind the whole internet and follow those packets around and figure out who's doing what in a way that no other agency or government anywhere in the world has that level of capability like the NSA has. And they're given this low confidence. They don't have any reason to believe that it was the Russians who hacked and leaked this stuff. Julian Assange, of course, swore that it wasn't and that he could help prove that it never came from any national government. And I certainly believe him. He's not a liar. He never has been a liar. And has never been proven to have published a false document ever. But anyway, so then on the 9th, Obama orders them to drop a new assessment. And I'm sorry, forgive me, I forget the exact language of the thing, but it seemed to assume the conclusion, right? Give me an assessment of Russian meddling for Trump. So now it's like, okay, that's what we're doing, is we're coming up with an assessment that says that the Russians meddled for Trump. And then so they start to build a case from there. And whenever they have informants or their own internal experts who bring up contrary information or points of view, those are all dismissed. So they had a guy who was like one of their best spies, who was close to, or maybe not even a spy, but like an informant who was close to Putin, who told them that, yeah, Putin told me he doesn't care who wins. He doesn't think either of them are going to be good for Russia, but he's also not worried about it because he thinks he can handle both of them. And they ignored that because that was contrary to their thinking, even though this is one of their best human sources that they have in Russia. And there are other examples like that, where the CIA experts who knew better and said, I don't believe this, they were sidelined and others were brought in to write the thing. And we've known a lot of that for a long time because of the great Paul Sperry at Real Clear Investigations. He has had a lot of this, for a long time. Matt Taibbi and his buddies at Racket News published a thing, I'm going to say in early 24, that was the deal about, it was Brennan who started this in late 15. As see, he had said that to PBS Frontline, and there was one other source before that, but then Taibbi proved it from the House investigation. And so this is what happened too. Kash Patel was the investigator for Devin Nunes in the House when they wrote up their own internal study of the secret CIA and FBI documents. And that's what Gabbard is going off of now, is the work that they had already done. And then she, again, kicked it over as a criminal referral, trying to get justice to form a task force to go after these guys for real. So we'll see what the Attorney General does. I'm not going to hold my breath that any of these guys are going to go to prison, but I have to tell you, I take great comfort in knowing that they're afraid at all, and I'm sure that they are. James Clapper is lawyered up. I saw a headline today, James Clapper ain't talking. And these guys were lying. They knew they were lying. And so I don't know. Well, see, here's what we do know about Obama, okay? We know that Obama knew that Hillary had a plan to frame up Trump. Now, we don't know what else he'd been told. Obviously, he's going to say, I don't know. The head of the CIA told me all this was true, and I believed him. It's not my fault, right?
Wait, and how do we know that again? How do we know that again, that he knew? Because John Brennan, and this has got to be just CYA here, John Brennan briefed him in July that we have intelligence, that the Russians have intelligence, that Hillary Clinton has agreed to a plan by one of her foreign policy staffers to pin the hacking of her server on Donald Trump, on Russia, and to say that it was in favor of Trump. And so he briefed that to Barack Obama and Joe Biden in July, that like, Mr. President, you should know that we overheard the Russians over here in Hillary, and this is what they're doing. And so, and then in the John Durham investigation, he was the guy who was appointed to investigate the origins of Russiagate. Although he didn't really get anywhere. He brought a couple low-level prosecutions that didn't get very far. But in his report, he was really complains about this and takes it very seriously, calls it the Clinton Plan Intelligence, and talks about how, again, they knew this in July of 16. And so this is right when their first Robbie Mook is going on TV and first blaming the Russians for the hack. And so they knew that whole time that, and you know what, there's got to be a guy way smarter than me who can draw the chart of the different offices at the FBI, the different investigators and the different investigations at the FBI and at the CIA, and who's talking to each other and who's telling each other what. Durham does a pretty good job of that in his report, but it gets very difficult to tell. But you can see where some things are clearly Jim Comey is behind this put on. And in other places, the guys who work for him are saying, well, we don't believe this, boss. And then like sometimes they get in trouble for it. Sometimes that makes the paper. In October, I think after, forgive me my timeline, I think it was after Clapper had put out a thing saying
that this was going on, that then the New York Times ran a piece saying that it wasn't, and that the FBI thought that there was no clear preference for Trump, and that they were just like sowing discord, as they say, being disruptive, like for the fun of it or whatever, but that it wasn't any particular thing. And it was some FBI agents had put that in maybe it was even CIA sources for that, had put that in the New York Times in October. So then you can see how they went trying to fix that. Like, no, we've got to get this narrative going again. And there's a couple of points, man. I know. Taibbi has a thing where he says, okay, for the conclusion in the January 2017 intelligence community assessment that Putin clearly favored Trump, had a clear preference for Trump, and was intervening in the election for him, which I don't think Russia intervened in the election at all. The whole thing's completely stupid. But as far as the alleged motive behind the thing was the Steele dossier, which was completely discredited, a completely unconfirmed rumor of a guy said that after the election, an unidentified Russian said, or maybe like a guy on TV said that, well, Putin and Trump should figure out how to get along like businessmen. After the election was over. And then an email that has some indication that Trump was preferred by Putin, but they didn't know who sent the email, and they didn't know who the recipient of the email was, and they didn't know when it was sent. And is this even an email at all? How could they? There's nothing. They had nothing. It was 4 zeros combined together, or 5. It was four bogus pieces of intelligence plus the bogus Steele dossier was the basis of the entire conclusion. And in fact, when one of the CIA senior analysts confronted John Brennan about the Steele dossier and said, none of this is confirmed, none of it holds up, he said, yeah, but doesn't it ring true? And, they ratted him out. There was a whistleblower on this that we're only finding out about now that ratted him out about this, which really raises the question, where were all the whistleblowers? We know that Brennan was sidelining CIA analysts who were telling him that this isn't true. And then after Trump is sworn in and there's 10,000 leaks calling him a traitor, none of these CIA analysts had the courage to go down to the White House and say, look, man, I can get you out of this, but you're going to have to promise not to send me to prison for violating my secrecy agreement. You know what I mean? But like, they could have blown the whistle then. They could have made a public stink about it. They could have gone to prison if they had to, which of course he would have pardoned them if they're saving his neck. If they had just come out and tell the truth, right? Like maybe they couldn't get the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to print it, but they could have got the Federalist to print it. They could have gone on the Tucker Carlson show. They could have done something to say, listen, man, I work there and I'm telling you, this stuff is not true. And it's really amazing to see, especially when you just think about the quantity of leaks from FBI and CIA against Trump during that time. And then the absolute silence when it comes to leaks in his favor. One of the major examples to me is we know that the FBI had their hands on Hunter Biden's laptop in November of 2019. This is the sort of during the secondary scandal, Ukrainegate, son of Russiagate. And what was Ukrainegate? Ukrainegate was supposedly Trump was putting some kind of illegal or inordinate pressure on Ukraine to launch an investigation into Joe Biden's corrupt son, Hunter, and his relationship with this Ukrainian gas company, Burisma, and its owner, Mykola Zolochevsky, or however you say that. And meanwhile, the FBI had the laptop that had emails back and forth between the executives of Burisma and Hunter Biden. And they're saying, hey, come on with the results already. You promised us that if we bribed you with all that money, that you could get the U.S. to get the authorities here to back off of us. What's the holdup? We want to see some deliverables and all this. All this is on that laptop. All this proves that Donald Trump was right, that the criminal investigation into Burisma was closed down when there were crimes to be investigated, when there was corruption right here, and that Biden and his son were involved in it. And there's proof. I have a whole section on this in the book too. Is demonstratively, provenly true from the information in the son's laptop that Biden met these guys and talked with them before and lied that he hadn't. And all of this stuff, all that could have come out during the impeachment. Dude, they're impeaching the president of the United States for the third time in history. And nobody at the FBI says pss, 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 to a reporter, we actually have emails from Hunter Biden doing some pretty corrupt stuff with this Burisma thing. He really was hired to provide legal cover to get them out of criminal jeopardy through his connections. Nobody leaked that. During the impeachment of the president, his own government. It's amazing. It really is amazing. It's a window into what the system really is and how it really works. You know, how these agencies act as our secret police.
I do have to ask, just because it is so related, and you've made this point that Russiagate really was the precursor to the Ukraine war. And I saw Charlie Kirk just made this point on Tucker Carlson's podcast as well. So I'm just curious, where do you stand on Trump's responsibility over the fact that the Ukraine war hasn't ended yet? Is this his war now?
Well, I mean, a couple of things there. So first of all, what I meant by that was that if it hadn't been for Russiagate, he could have solved Ukraine in his first term. We already had a deal. Minsk II was signed by Obama in February of 15. Well, it was signed by the allies and rubber stamped by Obama and rubber stamped by the UN Security Council. So when Trump came in, we had a deal. It just needed to be implemented, and he could have worked a deal. If he'd just been treated as a normal president in a normal time who won his election fair and square, and he gets to deal, he gets to have his policy, then the thing would have been resolved in 2017 or 18, and that would have been it. There would have been no war at all. So that's what I meant by that. And Charlie Kirk's right if that's what he meant as well. I know Aaron Matei is writing a book right now along those lines as well, how Russiagate helped lead to the Ukraine war by sabotaging peace. And also put all this pressure on Trump to act out and act tough on Russia. So when he bombed Syria over one of the two sarin hoaxes that he fell for in 17 or 18, I think it was in 18, Don Jr. said, see, call us Russian agents now. Maybe it was even in 17. You can't call us Russian agents now. Here we are bombing Russia's friends, the Syrians. Would we do that if we were Russian spies? So you see what's happening there, right? They're like protecting their right flank. And Trump even says to this day, Obama sent blankets. I'm the one who sent weapons. Yeah, but that was stupid and wrong because you just made Ukraine more of a threat. They acted like they were deterring the Russians. The Russians looked deterred to you. They didn't deter them. They provoked them. And as even the CIA said, throwing Joe Biden under the bus, that they warned the politicians, stop sending weapons. You are miscalibrating the amount of weapons that you're sending in. This is not really enough to deter them, but it is enough to provoke them into going ahead and invading now, since obviously they're going to have to fight sooner or later. They'd rather do it sooner than later. But the obviously is because you keep arming them. So this is a counterproductive policy. Trump should not have done that. Forget acting tough, all posturing tough. You're already a Republican. You're already rich. You're already tall. You're already tougher than Barack Obama, the panty waist. So you don't have to act tough. You just already are tough enough. Fine. But nope, he had to prove, I'm no pro-Russian guy. Watch this. I'm going to pour all these weapons into Ukraine. And that really did help to precipitate the war. When Joe Biden came in, he continued that same policy he got from Trump. And now Obama had sent in some weapons. I don't want to play that down. His official policy was he won't send them, but then he licensed the sale of some and whatever. But it was much less than what Trump had authorized in his first term. Again, to cover his right flank from these false accusations of treason that he never committed, which was a terrible. He should have just gone the other way, full judo. He should have just invited Putin to Washington and took him out to the ball game, and then signed a gigantic new nuclear treaty and said, screw you guys. I don't give a damn what you say. And in fact, I always thought that this was the brilliant solution to Russiagate, that it was Ray McGovern's idea. That what Trump should have done is he should have given a speech where he just fired all of the top 25 guys at Justice, FBI, and CIA. And then, but before the speech was over, in the same speech, he should have announced, and I am hereby declassifying every scrap of paper any of these agencies or departments have on me or any of the guys on my team, for my campaign team from last year. This Russiagate thing is a hoax. And we're going to take all that paper, we're going to print it all out in quintuplicate, and we're going to deliver it to the Post, the Times, the Journal, National Public Radio, and the San Francisco Chronicle. And then you boys have fun. Do your worst. I'm not afraid of you. Let's see what you got. We'll have a truck full, drop the documents off right at Rachel Maddow's house. And let's see what you can find, dumb bimbo. And then that would have been it, because there was nothing in there. And he would have won, and it would have been over. And by the way, he was that confident, because we know, well, if you could believe a thing that Bob Woodward says, this seems right, that Trump's lawyer was a guy named Dowd. And he said to Trump, look, man, it's just you and me here, okay? Attorney-client privilege, bro. But you got to be honest with me. Tell me, please, is there anything to this Russia thing at all? And Trump said, no, dude, the whole thing is so stupid. No. And he said, okay, well, then my strategy is I want to give everything we've got over to the special prosecutor. And because, of course, I stopped the story at the part before the part where they appointed a special counsel to pretend to investigate this for another 2 years after he was sworn in. And so Dowd said, let me give everything to them. And I'll tell them, listen, we're being straight with you, so you be cool with us too. You guys hurry up and don't drag this out, because it ain't fair to do this. Special prosecutor just ruin your whole damn presidency. But we're not going to fight you over any of this. Here's the data. Have it. And sent them trucks full of papers over there. Gave them everything. And then, of course, it was a deal he made with Andrew Weissman, the lying scumbag, who said, oh, yeah, sure, we got a deal, Dowd. And then they dragged it out for 2 years, leaking all along to try to make him seem guilty and doing nothing to quell all of the treasonous rumors at the time, too. Nope, you're just going to have to wait another 2 years to find out whether your president is a blackmailed, guilty traitor with his finger on the nuclear button, a slave of the Kremlin in charge of our nuclear arsenal. You're just going to have to be patient, Liam. We'll tell you, what's today? April? We'll tell you 2 Aprils from now. And so that was the way that they did that. But it goes to show that Trump, he knew he wasn't guilty. He knew that Carter Page didn't do anything. He knew the whole thing was crap. And so he was perfectly happy to turn all those papers over to the special prosecutor. But he just wasn't smart enough to think of the trick. No, what he should have done was he should have fired all them and had security frog march them the hell out of the buildings and no, you don't get to clean out your desk, and kicked everybody the hell out of there, and then sent those papers straight to the Washington Post and said, come on, Philip Bump, I ain't scared of you, boy. Come on, bring it and see. And that was how they should have handled it. It would have been over. It was a travesty. It really is crazy. It's no different than really a hair different than just shooting him in the face in Dallas. I mean, that's the permanent government of the United States saying, we don't give a damn who won the election. He's not going to exercise power around here. Everybody always thought Bill Clinton killed Vince Foster. I always thought the FBI did it. He was going to rat on them over Waco. And it was the FBI. And in fact, there's even footage of somebody comes up to Bill Clinton at a press conference or a speech or some event, and they whisper in his ear, hey, they found Vince Foster's killed. And Bill goes, oh my God. Like he's not faking it. He's like, oh my God. Well, dude, that was the FBI murdered Vince Foster, dude. And look, I understand. I hate Bill Clinton too. It's easier to just jump to the conclusion that it was him, but why would he murder his own buddy? It wasn't that. It was that the guy felt terrible about Waco and was going to get them in trouble over it. Now, maybe it was just a suicide, but I don't think so. I think there was a lot too. Like, well, how come his gun changed color and which side of the parking lot it was laying on? And how come there's no dirt on his feet? And he's 300 yards into a muddy park at night. And you know what I mean? There's a bunch of stuff to it. But yeah, the FBI are ruthless murderers. They murder the Branch Davidians and their little babies. You think they wouldn't murder Vince Foster? Think they wouldn't murder you? They took on the president of the United States, framed him for treason. They're the Gestapo. They're the enemy of the American people. That's why we were never supposed to have a national police force in the first place. They're a completely unconstitutional agency.
So what now, though? Why is Donald Trump sending a weapons package to Ukraine? Why hasn't he been able to end it yet?
Well, so the thing is that he just got inaugurated for his second term at the wrong time. The Russians are winning, but they haven't won yet. And their strategy is to move very slowly and win a war of attrition. So rather than just making big moves and taking land, they're just chewing up the opposing forces with artillery and taking their time as they move. So when they first came in, they annexed the Donbass, which is Donetsk and Luhansk. Well, they control virtually all of Luhansk. They only control about 3/4 of Donetsk, and they're making real progress in Donetsk right now. They still have about a third of Zaporozhye and about a third of Kherson, which they have officially annexed now after the Ukrainians' best week in September of 2022. Putin got angry and said, oh, okay, you kick us all the way out of Kharkiv and all that. That's fine. We hereby officially annex Zaporozhye and Kherson. How do you like that? Well, so this is what they call the land bridge, right? The whole land area, the Azov coast between Russia and the Crimean Peninsula. And the thing is, Trump goes, okay, ceasefire, stop fighting. And the Russians go, okay, fine. But the Ukrainians have to turn around and walk off the territory that they now control and give it to us because we're taking all of Zaporozhye and Kherson. And when we're talking Kherson, a third of it is on the other side of the river where the Russians would need just the ability to sail right over there without being under fire to take that territory and take control of it. And then, of course, that's a huge rub because that's on the other side of the river. So the Russians are short of their goals, but the Ukrainians haven't lost yet. And the ask that, hey, you guys need to turn around and walk away from territory that you still control, they're not giving into that. And especially they are very taken with these kind of, nationalistic and romantic notions about their future victory here that don't seem to really rely on reason as much as like using the evil eye and like ridiculous superstitious beliefs to somehow win anyway, even though even Kamala Harris could tell you Russia is a bigger country and it's right next door. See, so that's bad. Yeah, that's bad. All right. It'd be like if America invaded Mexico. They could put up a fight, but there's more of us and we have more money and more high explosives, and everybody knows that. Don't ever try to pacify the Sierra Madre down there, but otherwise, out in the desert, on the flat land, can the army take control through violence? Yes. Eventually, all the way down to Chiapas if they have to. Yeah. Same thing here. And so Trump's calling timeout, but nobody wants a timeout. The Russians aren't done winning and the Ukrainians aren't done losing. And so now him saying, okay, well, I want to send weapons over there now. I guess he's just frustrated and mostly blaming the Russians. So after all, the Russians, they are winning. They're on, they're taking the other country's territory away. So it's not a pure case. I wrote the book on it, but in the end, they are the aggressor nation here, and they're refusing to back down when Trump already said back down. And so his reaction to that is, oh yeah, well, you're making me mad. Now I'm going to do something. I'm going to send in weapons. I'm going to add more sanctions. But what did I tell you 8 months ago or whatever? Biden already tried that. Send in more weapons, add more sanctions. You're not going to make the difference. There's no weapons system we're going to deliver over there in any quality or quantity that's going to change the actual calculus on the battlefield whatsoever. It's just not going to happen. Other than if we start dropping nukes or dropping the 82nd Airborne.
Do you think we're in the end stages then, or do you think this could still escalate?
Well, I think, yes, it could escalate. They could expand their goals as well. I think by the logic of government programs, they've kind of gotten themselves in a bind, right? as I said right when the war started. If they take the pro-Russian population out of Ukraine by drawing a new line around them, then they're leaving any other pro-Russians or ethnic Russians, at least in the country, as an even smaller minority than they were before. And they used to win elections, and that's why we had to keep intervening to overthrow the government there twice in 10 years, right? 3 times in a row, in fact. In 94, 04, and 14, America intervened there. And otherwise, the people of the East would hold the presidency, more likely. Now we're taking all them out of the country, or many of them out of the country. That means that side's never going to win again. That means that they ever do hold elections, and it'll be hard right-wingers from the far west of the country that win, who hate the Russians and would be intent on continuing to persecute them. So under that logic, the Russians have to keep going until they take Sumy and Kharkiv and Dnipro, Provatsk, or whatever, however you say it, the one between the river and the Donbass there, and essentially everything east of the river. But then, to do that, they'd have to be done smashing the Ukrainian army and go ahead and be able to walk around and just take whatever they want at that point to do that. At that point, then, now they have everything to the river. Oh, and even Kherson, some on the other side of the river. Well, now Odessa's right there. The jewel of the Black Sea, the most important civilian port. And not only could the Russians take it for themselves, but they could take it away from Ukraine. And in fact, now they're only a hop, skip, and a jump to Transnistria, which you may know, your audience may not know, is a small strip of land on the Moldovan side of the Dniester River, which is the border between Ukraine and Moldova. And it's controlled by Russia. It's one of these frozen conflicts left over from the fall of the Soviet Union. So if you're the Russians and you're standing on the Crimean Peninsula and Odessa's right there and Transnistria is right there, why stop now? Especially when they can't really stop until they've really won and destroyed the Ukrainian regime, or military state at least. Now once they've done that, now there's nobody to stop them from going ahead and keep going. Odessa was founded by Catherine the Great. It's a historically Russian city. So from their point of view, they want it, quote, back, belongs to them. Especially, people to the right of Putin have been pressuring him to keep going. Same for Kharkiv. That was historically a Russian city there. And so I'm not saying that gives them the right to it. I'm describing what is the point of view of many people in Russian politics is, we come this far, ain't no stopping now. Which just goes to show why we should not have gotten our friends, the Ukrainians, into this mess, because they could never win this fight. And you know what? Whatever, man. I'm an American. I would just side with America against Russia if it was that easy to do. I just would. What can I say? But it was America that got Ukraine into this. They forced this issue when they had no ability to protect Ukraine. It's akin to promising Poland will keep Hitler out, when no, you won't. You might help Stalin keep Hitler out eventually after he makes a deal with Hitler to co-invade the country together. But then Stalin's going to take the whole thing, and the people of Poland won't be even slightly better off compared to their enslavement under the Nazis. And so it's the same thing here. We're like, we can't protect you, but we're perfectly happy to get you in a fight with your bully that lives next door. But it was, the Russians had let the status quo hold. As I show in the book, I kind of go through a whole kind of mini history of the Crimean Peninsula after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and how there'd been some controversy, and yet back and forth, they had essentially settled the degree of autonomy that the people of Crimea were willing to accept to stay in Ukraine. And overall, that status quo had held for 25 years. For 25 years. Or 24 years, till Barack Obama came in and blew it up. So, in other words, all other things being equal, there's no reason in the world to believe that Russia would have ever done this if America hadn't have pushed their case. The war, starting the war and then refusing to end it, the civil war, so-called, in the East, that had already been raging since 14, and continued threats of NATO expansion and the rest. And so, yeah, Ukraine is screwed. And by the way, so once they're done taking all the Russian population out of the country, now they're going to be faced with a permanently aggressive and hateful nationalist Ukrainian, Ruthenian population from the West, from Lviv and around there, who are just avowedly Russia haters and in many cases are Nazis, although I think probably most of the Nazis have been killed in the war by now, but not all of them. And so it's going to be a permanent enemy state. By that logic, and I saw Putin say this the other day, like, hey, Ukraine always did belong to us anyway. He could just keep going. Say, you Europeans, you love these people so much, you take them, but we're taking the country. And march all the way to Moldova and Poland. At some point, there won't be much to stop them. And you have the whole, national pride and everything wrapped up in the whole adventure. And they have lost hundreds of thousands of guys in the thing as well. 2 or 3 times what we lost in Vietnam, maybe more than that. So that's a hard won fight. And as I say, it's like a Pyrrhic victory. The more they win, the worse position they put themselves in. So they write themselves another check to go further, right? It's a government program and it operates under that same logic. So I regret to say, I don't know when the Ukrainian military will finally just break and turn tail and run because they just don't have the logistic support in the background to keep them going any longer or what it would take to get them to that point. But as far as the overall fighting and even Russia facing an insurgency in what's left of rump Ukraine and all that, I could see this going on for years, if not longer.
And you can kind of see why Putin would think that it has to, because if a Hillary Clinton type gets in there, we could just revert back to plan A in 10 years and fund the insurgency. So you can see why he would want to and why he would have every incentive to continue it. But I guess, as you mentioned, Pat Buchanan, I guess our hope is that the modern day Pat Buchanan, Tucker Carlson, prevails and he continues to push the right in our direction.
Yep. And look, especially because this is Biden's war first. And a lot of people feel that way, that this just didn't have to be this way. And it was the damn Democrats who got us into it. So John McCain is dead, long gone. Charles Krauthammer too. So there's no reason why Michael Knowles has to be loyal to this one. I think he's always been good on this one because what incentive does he have to be bad on it? None, right? And so we already had the consensus against the Ukraine war on the right. We just need to spread that same consensus to Palestine.
Yeah.
But only fools want to fight Russia. Only people who are wrong think that that's right. What else can you say, man?
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap on that note. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining me. Where can people find your stuff?
Oh, man. Everybody get your pen and piece of paper. Start writing an email to yourself or something here. Subject line, Scott Horton's stuff. ScottHorton.org is where I got 6,000 interviews going back to 2003. ScottHortonShow.com is the Substack where you can listen to the audiobook. The first 3 sections of the audiobook of Provoked are up there now. Provoked is the new show with Daryl Cooper. And it's also the name of the book, of course, the last book about Russia. But that's the new show. As you said, #1 new show on Apple Podcasts, and it's on YouTube.com there. New episode hits tomorrow night. And I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, which is me and about 20 of the best libertarians that you could ever shake a stick at anywhere over there at libertarianinstitute.org. All great podcasts and articles, and great article by Jim Bovard about Waco up there today, and all kinds of great stuff. A lot of foreign policy and whatever. And of course, I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, which is the most important project on the internet. And check out all the great Dave DeCamp and Eric Garris and Kyle Anzalone's work there every day. And then read my books. Fool's Errand about Afghanistan. Enough already about the terror wars, and Provoked about the war in Ukraine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott.
Absolutely. Thank you, man.
Thanks for tuning into the Liam McCollum Show, a podcast by Human Reaction. Check out the Human Reaction weekly podcast hosted by Joe Sheehan, David Rand, and Kyle Mack. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to both of our channels.